Well, it has certainly been an eventful Passover for the American Jewish community. On college campuses around the country, student activists, spurred on by often outside instigators, are protesting against Israel. Now, many of them will tell you they're not protesting against Israel. They're protesting against the policies of Israel's government and in support of Palestinian rights. Were that the case, many of us might well be joining them, but it is not. Calls for Jews to go back to Poland, claims that Zionists don't deserve to live, those are not protests against Israel's policies. Those are protests against Israel's existence. And they are, without question, anti-Semitic. Are all of the protesters anti-Semites? Of course not. But the protests themselves are, I believe, functionally anti-Semitic. Now, as I wrote to our congregants earlier in the week, as difficult as things are right now, and they are, I do believe that they will begin to get better as campus administrators are compelled to come face to face with the insidious manner through which anti-Semitism enters their campus dynamics, both socially and academically. Now, it's not the students' responsibility to open their eyes. The students are there to learn. That responsibility is ours. All of us who are alumni, we have the ability to pick up the phone, to take pen in hand, and to make our voices heard. The Haggadah, which we read a couple of nights ago, reminds us, B'chol dor vador, in every generation there will be those who rise up seeking to do us harm. That has certainly been the case this year. We have experienced it at home, and Israel has surely experienced it. Today is the 203rd day that more than 100 are still being held captive in Gaza. On this festival of freedom, we pray that they may soon be returned to those they love. And the Haggadah also reminds us that great strength abides within our people, within each of us individually and within all of us collectively. When we link arms, we are strong. We are strong in support of one another. We are strong in support of our students on campus. We're strong in support of Israel. And we are strong in our faith, that our responsibilities extend beyond our own people too, to all the suffering of the world, including the Palestinians. May these brightening days of spring and the Shabbat lights we're about to kindle illumine all of us with hope for better days to come.
Shabbat Shalom. A few days ago, I learned of legislation which would award compensation to airline passengers who had been subjected to extraordinary delays. And that seems to be a welcome win for disappointed travelers. Soon, airlines aware of their anticipated financial penalty, to say nothing of the poor publicity, will be motivated to be more mindful of their obligation to their passengers. And those affected will be compensated for the poor service. It's a big and comprehensive and satisfying response to an irritating, though not catastrophic problem. A fix for something which is on so many minds, which has been so long in coming. And would you be surprised to learn that there is also legislation created 60 years ago for the burgeoning problem which is being felt today on so many college campuses, which is the pervasive climate of fear, which Rabbi Davidson so poignantly captured. It's known as Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which requires universities which receive public funding to protect students from harassment and discrimination. All students, regardless of their background. All students, even Jews. What does it say about our times that as families came together for Seder, so many parents offered an additional blessing, one of gratitude, that their child was not on campus for the holiday? As Rabbi Davidson explained, the Haggadah teaches these truths. B'chol dor vador, in every generation, we are to see ourselves as if we ourselves had left Egypt. B'chol dor vador, in every generation, there are those who rise up against us. In these intermediate days of Passover, we are living between Mitzrayim, the narrow places which constrict us, and the complications that arise from the freedoms of living in a pluralistic society. Protected speech and free expression have long been a friend to anyone who is different from the majority. And yet it is hard not to be reactive or fearful when just beyond our doorstep and on so many campuses, and now in diverse venues too, we hear slogans that are not just words, but are a threat against who we are, a threat against our very being. We have seen and are seeing daily how easily they can cross the line from speech to hate, from acts of intimidation to harm. But first, let's ask if these campus protests are any different from their predecessors. There are many among us who recall having been part of protests, teach-ins, demonstrations, and marches against the Vietnam War and for civil rights, banning the bomb, divestment from South Africa, about Black Lives Matters. As recently as Tuesday on Earth Day, there were multiple protests to raise awareness about climate change. And May 4th is the anniversary of the Kent State Massacre, which was a tragic turning point for student protests in that generation. Today's protests are different in this way. They aren't just protesting the war in Gaza. As Rabbi Davidson just taught, these screeds conflate anti-Zionism with the right of Jews to exist at all, openly calling for the death of a classmate because of who they are or what they believe constitutes a threat. It isn't merely a protected act of speech. And such threats have no place on campus, in the workplace, in civil society, in our democracy. You may have heard that yesterday, Hamas endorsed the protests on Columbia's campus, noting that these students are the next generation of leaders. And how ironic that hatred makes them qualified. For what exactly? Yet in every generation, it seems, campus protests in particular are a kind of coming of age when a student wakes up to the larger world, a world which doesn't conform to the pure ideals conveyed in the classroom, to the disparity between the utopia of college life, where one's primary responsibility is to be exposed to others who aren't exactly like you, to brave the discomfort of making space for ideas and practices which are unfamiliar, to grow intellectually and emotionally through engagement in differences. This is the great purpose of university education. For so many young people, campus life is a time of exploration and individuation, often characterized by rejecting rules and trying on an assortment of identities to see what fits. Is this who I am? Asks the child who sports new dreadlocks or a mohawk or a shaved head and tattoos or even a kippah. Is this who you are? The adult wonders too. There's a reason why our Haggadah includes the rubric of the 4 children, so we are reminded and we can hear 4 different voices. We know them as the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who doesn't even know how to ask. And each year as we read through this assemblage of personalities, we identify with one or more, though we may not admit it to the other Seder participants. At different stages of our lives, we too have different priorities. Some say that the qualities of each of these children can be found within every individual, and others note that these 4 represent very different kinds of people who make up and contribute to a robust society. This year, Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt wrote a post-October 7th contemporary version to bring the discussion at the Seder table up to date. Today she wrote, "The 4 children are a Zionist, a Palestinian solidarity activist, a peacenik, and one who doesn't know what to even dream. The Zionist, what does she say? 2,000 years we dreamed of return. Next year in Jerusalem is now, and hope is the beacon we steer by. The solidarity activist, what do they say? We know the heart of the stranger. To be oppressors is unbearable. Uplift the downtrodden. The peacenik, what does he say? We both love this land, and neither is leaving. We're in this together. Between the river and the sea, 2 peoples must be free. And the one who doesn't even know what to dream, feed that one sweet charoset, a reminder that building a just future has always been our call. We are one people, one family, not only because history's flames never asked what kind of Jew one might be, but because the dream of collective liberation is our legacy. We need each other in this wilderness. Only together can we build redemption. It is this very intersection of society that has taken hold on so many campuses, though the dominant voices drown out any calls for peace and obscure the voice of the dreamer. What's left are strident screams which claim to hold the one immutable truth, which is hatred. In an opinion piece published yesterday, entitled "I'm a Columbia Professor, the protests on my campus are not justice," John McWhorter, a professor of linguistics, recalls his own student years, a time when divestment from South Africa was the pressing issue of the day. He wrote, "I don't recall South Africans on campus feeling personally targeted, but the bigger difference was that though the protesters sought to make their point at high volume, over a loud period, and sometimes even rudely, they did not seek to all but shut down campus life." He continued, "Today's protesters don't hate Israel's government any more than yesterday's hated South Africa's, but they have pursued their goals with a remarkably different tenor, in part because of the single-mindedness of anti-racist academic culture, and in part because of the influence of iPhones and social media, which inherently encourages a more heightened degree of performance. It is part of the warp and woof of today's protests that they are being recorded from many angles for all the world to see. One must speak up. One speaks up for Instagram and TikTok, for the feeling of being virtuous by joining the encampment. I have found that by listening to protesters interviewed on social media, when asked what they stand for, before answering, any number of them have turned to the friend sitting next to them and said, "What is this again? Yes, Palestine, I know, but what else?" And then they turn sheepishly back to the camera and say, almost confessionally, "I wish I were better informed or more knowledgeable," as if the protest itself was the destination, simply the hottest social event on campus, complete with a keffiyeh dress code. Why aren't the demonstrators railing against Hamas for holding their own people hostage by placing military headquarters in hospitals and schools, by using them as human shields? Why aren't they condemning the genocidal actions of October 7th, the sexual assaults and the brutal murder of innocents? And in their silence, they have silenced others who want to speak up, to engage the complexity of peace in the Middle East, or even more, to be allowed just to be a student, to study and learn, as was their intention in September. One speaks up. How can one speak up on a campus when it isn't even safe to walk to class? And when a school offers students the option to take classes and exams remotely, isn't the university admitting that they cannot keep all students safe on campus? And by all, I mean Jews. During the pandemic, remote learning taught us how to coexist in the face of a deadly disease. And now the disease is even more lethal because there is no vaccine in development to to cure anti-Semitism, hatred, or intolerance. As it grows unchecked, its ability to ravage society is amplified, and the devastation it wreaks is hard to recover from. John McWhorter concludes his on-campus observations with these thoughts. These changes in moral history and technology can hardly be expected to comfort Jewish students in the here and now. What began as an intelligent protest has become, in its uncompromising fury and its ceaselessness, a form of abuse. Precisely because we are Jews and we revere history and story and seek understanding from our personal experiences and our people's experiences, it is impossible not to analogize. This morning, a friend sent me a picture which shows men in uniform holding hands to create a human barrier on the steps on which they stand. And the caption reads, "Nazis block Jews from entering the University of Vienna, Austria, 1938. And you would be right to ask, what can we learn today from Columbia University's historic takeover of the campus and its administration circa 1968? Or the Kent State Massacre in 1970? Analogize, assess, learn. But it is equally essential to realize that history cannot predict the future. It can only inform. B'chol dor v'ador, in every generation, may we bring a new depth of understanding to these complicated times. Moadim l'simcha, Shabbat Shalom.